Hi there, Christian Henson from Spitfire Audio here. Going to try and explain the concepts of polyconvolution, how this thing BT Phobos works, and actually what indeed is convolution all in one go. And it's not easy because I suspect the people who made BT Phobos, BT and Martin, I think they actually employed magic. So I'm going to use a bit of sorcery myself to try and explain it. But convolution in a simple mathematical sense is taking two things and turning them into a third thing, a different thing. And I think in the sense of music and sound, we tend to imply that it is putting one sound inside another. So the obvious choice is to go into a room, fire a starting pistol, record it or sample it, use that as an impulse response, get another sound and put that sound inside that sound, and suddenly that sound is in a room. So I think we asked the question, well, does it have to be a room sample? Can we not use loops as impulse responses, tones, that kind of thing? So I'm going to try and demonstrate what we mean by the use of some of my kids' modelling clay and a little bit of sorcery. So first of all, let's think about a source sound. So let's take this blue piece of plasticine and we'll use that as the source sound. Now we're going to use another sound, this red piece of plasticine. We're going to use that as the sound that the blue sound is going to go inside. Now, you could say, well, isn't that just mixing? Well, no. Mixing, you could bring the sounds close together, or you could make one louder than the other, or you could make the other one louder than the other, or you could spread them out a bit more. But they're always two sounds kind of working in the same space, if you know what I mean. So let's bring them back together and use this red one to go round the outside, or put this inside that one. And the best way to do it is, this is how convolution with plasticine works. So let's roll this out. Put that round there. It's like being on Blue Peter. And just roll it together. So there we go. So now, would you say that's two balls combined? Well, actually, I would just say that's a very interesting ball with blue and red stripes. So we've taken two things and created a new thing, a ball with red and blue stripes. So let's use another sound source, this blue one here, and a new impulse response, a slightly knobbly one, you can see here. Now this is, say, representing a loop. So how am I going to put the blue inside the red? Well, I'm going to distribute these little knobbles of the loop around the plasticine. Now, again, would you say that is a red and blue ball combined, or is that in fact a blue ball with red spots? So we've taken, again, two things and made a third thing out of those. So if we look inside Phobos, here's the really fancy GUI, we can see we have 4 sound sources. And we have 3 IRs, or convolution sources, W, Y, and X. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, W, X, and Y. And we're simply putting these sounds into these convolvers. Now you can see everything really kind of centers in on this fancy triangle in the middle. But in fact, all of this is a kind of a routing, a distribution device. So let's have a look at this signal path here. So if we hit middle C, what happens is a bit of MIDI triggers this sound source number 1. This then goes through a bunch of modulators or modules. Just think of these guitar pedals and imagine tying those all together. So the way you can look at those modules is if you just click on the one, you've got various things like your high pass, low pass filters, and the way in which the pitch and time, or time and pitch machine works, your envelopes, etc., etc. So we go through these modulators to our dry pot, which determines how much of that signal goes out to the amp. Now, is that polyconvolution? No, that's just simple sample triggering and putting it through a series of basic kind of dynamic modulators and straight out. But what we do at this point is also split the signal to the wet signal, and this then passes along into the triangle. Now let's just concentrate on this sound going into the W convolver. So what happens here is, let's take source number 1, and if we put that all the way over here, that's going to send loads to the W convolver. So instead of having 12 different knobs, you've basically got a triangle with 4 different pucks, which you can use to distribute the sound. So basically your puck is telling how much we're going to send to the convolver bus for W, which then goes all the way around here and through a bunch more modulators into the convolver. You can have a look at those modulators here. Simultaneously, what happens is the MIDI splits along these lines and triggers your impulse response, which in this case is 101 Intrepid. This goes through a couple of modulators. It convolves with the source signal, goes through a couple more modulators which have been selected by BT to specifically work with this process, at which point it's then sent out of the amplifier. So is that polyconvolution? Well, no, it isn't. That's just convolution. And whilst it is quite unusual for a single plugin to have 3 convolvers and this unusual triangle distribution unit, it is simply like using Space Designer in Logic. You know, it's like passing a sound source through a waveform that isn't a room IR, it just might be a tone or something like that. So what makes it polyconvolution? Well, another common thing that you'll be familiar with is if you hit more than one note on your keyboard, so say C and G, what will happen, it'll trigger a duplicate sound but at a different pitch, at G in this case, or is it F? This will then go through its own set of modulators, which are set by the parameters that you've determined on the other ones, into its own dry pot, and then out. Now this also isn't polyconvolution, this is just polyphony. So what's really clever, it doesn't only trigger the new sound at F, it also goes to its own wet pot through the same process into a new convolver, and then the MIDI is split and triggers a duplicate IR, and if it's tonal it'll be pitched correctly, which then go into that convolver and then out through a whole new set of modules, but again set to the parameters, the global parameters you've set, out. And this can be repeated a number of times for repeated notes, for a whole bunch of different notes. So this is the complexity of BT Phobos. It is basically rendering loads of different impulse responses simultaneously. And conversely, we're just concentrating on one sound source, one IR. When you start adding this all up with our different things, it all starts getting really complicated, which is why it's quite impressive how this stuff renders in real time, ready to be played. If we return back to our plasticine example, when you hit a note, you get this nice stripy ball here, and then you can add in a little bit of your original dry mix, and then when you press your second note, you get a nice new stripy ball and a little blue ball, depending on how much dry mix you want in there. So let's have a listen to how this actually works in the real world. So we've got this thing called Big Banger, which is a loop, and it sounds like this. Fantastic. Now let's take this other loop called 101 Intrepid, and you'll notice we've also got 120 Big Banger as an IR in the Y convolver, and we're sending to that convolver. So let's have a listen to how Big Banger sounds when it's convolving 101 Intrepid. Conversely, we can listen to 120 Big Banger when it's being convoluted by 101 Intrepid. So you can hear really interesting immediate differences there between the dry signals and the convolved ones. And I think it's worth reminding you at this point that there's 20 gigabytes of amazing BT material in here to mess around with and create amazing compositions with. So let's take a nice tonal sound. And use that as the convolver for Intrepid. So let's have a listen to that. Really interesting sound there. Let's bring in the dry signal. So thanks for watching my explanation or attempted explanation of polyconvolution and a quick look at BT Phobos, how that is applied within the engine. Thanks to BT and to Martin for the magic. Cheers.